Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
By the time you hit 50 and your knees make more noise than your patrol radio, you start telling yourself you've seen everything. That's what I thought, anyway. My name's Tom Redding. Until not too long ago, I was chief of police in a mid-sized American town called Brookhaven. Population 80,000 on paper, a little more if you count the cousins who just crashed for the weekend 3 months ago. We had the usual, strip malls, high school football games that felt like the Super Bowl, a hospital that did its best, and a Walmart that contained 90% of our minor incidents. For 30 years, I wore the badge. Started as a rookie on night shift, worked my way up. The kind of career they put in recruitment brochures, commendations, a few medals, a couple of bullet holes in walls that could have been me if a perp hadn't been having a bad aim day. By 50, I was Chief Redding, the guy whose name showed up in the paper next to phrases like community trust and law and order. And through all of that, there was Alice. Alice was my anchor. My proof that I was still a person and not just a uniform with a coffee habit. We met back when she was in law school and I was a detective. She'd come right along to study police culture for some paper, and I spent the whole night trying not to swear and failing miserably. She was smart, quick, funny, and had that look like she'd already run the argument twice in her head before you opened your mouth. By the time she passed the bar, we were married. She went into civil law, tenant disputes, workplace discrimination, insurance companies behaving badly. She was good. Scary good. I used to joke that if I ever did anything wrong, I'd just turn myself in because I knew she'd destroy me in court if I didn't. We were that cliché couple, cop husband, lawyer wife. People made sitcom jokes about us. At barbecues, someone would always say, "Careful what you say, folks, Tom'll arrest you and Alice'll sue you." We'd laugh, and for a long time, it was just that simple. For a long time. The first hint that something had shifted came in the form of names. I started to hear them more often in our kitchen. "New client today," she'd say, sliding vegetables into a skillet. "Small business owner being harassed by the city." "Name?" I'd ask, mostly out of habit. She'd say a name I knew. Not from the Chamber of Commerce. From our case files. At first, it was one of our colorful locals with a reputation more than a record. Then another. Then someone I'd personally arrested twice. Then a guy whose nickname alone would have put him on my radar. "People don't call you Stacks because you're good at organizing books. You know he's dirty, right?" I said once, opening the fridge a little harder than necessary. She didn't look up from her chopping. "Allegedly dirty," she corrected. "And I'm not representing him for whatever you think. It's a civil matter. You're handling a civil case for a guy whose idea of conflict resolution is a tire iron." She set the knife down and turned to me, that lawyer posture sliding into place like someone clicked it on. "Tom, he has a right to counsel. I don't pick and choose clients based on your arrest record." I held up my hands. "I'm not saying you can't take the case. I'm just saying..." "You're saying what? That I shouldn't do my job because you don't like who I'm doing it for?" That ended that conversation. We had a few like that. Different names, same script. I'd recognize someone from a briefing and find out they were now a client. She'd claim it was just contracts, civil disputes, nothing you'd be interested in, honey. I'd tell myself not to mix work with home, not to be that controlling husband who thinks his wife can't make decisions for herself. Still. The names added up. And then there was the lunch. You know how in movies the moment everything changes is always raining and dramatic, with violins and slow motion? Real life likes to do it under harsh fluorescent lighting and the smell of reheated soup. It was a Thursday. Thursdays in Brookhaven always felt like the town was holding its breath for the weekend. I just finished a joyless meeting with the city manager about budget optimization, which is bureaucrat for how few officers can we pay without getting sued. On my way back to the station, my stomach reminded me I did nothing but coffee since sunrise. There's a little Italian place downtown, Luigi's, that every cop in a 50-mile radius has eaten at. The owner, actual name Tony, had been Luigi for so long that no one even bothered questioning it. I pulled in, thinking about lasagna. The hostess greeted me with the smile you give a regular who tips and doesn't cause trouble. "Table for one, Chief?" Yeah, if you've got a corner, I said. Chiefs get recognized a lot. Sometimes you want pasta without discussing parking tickets. She led me in, weaving between tables. That's when I saw them. Far corner booth. White tablecloth. 2 glasses of red wine, half finished. A plate of something expensive between them. Alice. And across from her, dressed in an expensively casual shirt and the kind of smugness that should be a crime in itself, Victor Calder. If you don't know the name, you've never lived in a town with organized crime pretending to be disorganized. Calder was the kind of guy who never personally carried anything illegal but somehow always managed to be surrounded by people who did. Everybody knew he was the de facto head of a local crew, some called them a gang, some called them the organization. Victor called it my business. My brain did this weird stutter. It's like when your GPS says you have reached your destination and all you see is an empty field. I think I actually stopped walking. Alice's eyes flicked up and met mine. Her smile froze for half a second. Calder turned to look, followed her gaze, and his grin widened. "Chief," he called out across the restaurant, raising his glass like we were golf buddies. "Didn't know you were coming by. Join us for a drink?" I must have looked like someone had unplugged me. I walked over slowly, because if I ran, people would ask why, and I didn't have an answer that fit in a police report. "Alice," I said. "Victor." "Tom." "Hey," she said, voice a little too bright. "This is a work lunch." "With Calder," I said, keeping my tone even. "Leader of the group I've had my department investigate for 3 years." Victor chuckled. "Alleged leader, Chief." I didn't look at him. "You're representing him now?" "A civil matter," she said quickly. "Regulatory issues. I'm just doing my job." I stared at her, then at the table. Documents, not menus. This wasn't a random meeting. This was business. Her business. His business. Very much not my business, according to everyone but my conscience. "Outside," I said quietly. She sighed, but she got up. We stepped toward the entryway, near the hostess stand, out of earshot of other diners. You can always tell when someone's trying not to be watched. We were very much being watched. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice low. "My job," she repeated, jaw tightening. "Don't start, Tom. You're having wine and a cozy lunch with a man who launders money through construction companies and has people beaten for fun. That's not some tenant dispute." Her eyes flashed. "You don't know the details of my cases." "I know his file," I said. "I know what he does. You want to be his lawyer, that's your business. But you're my wife, and you're the wife of the chief of police, and this, I gestured between her and Calder, "this is not nothing." She stepped closer, her face suddenly cold in a way I'd never seen turned on me. "I am a lawyer," she said, each word clipped. "I am allowed to represent whoever I choose, in whatever legal matters they retain me for. You do not get to control my client list. That's not what I'm trying to." She cut me off, her voice dropping to that quiet, dangerous register lawyers use right before they object. "I'm just doing my job. Don't you dare interfere. There are lines in a marriage you think will never get crossed." That sentence, in that tone, landed like someone drawing one in permanent marker. I held her gaze for a long second. Then I stepped back. "Enjoy your lunch," I said, and I walked out of Luigi's without getting my lasagna. That night I lay next to her in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft buzz of her phone every few minutes. She turned away when she checked it, screen light casting a glow on the wall. Sleep refused to show up. Thoughts did, though. Thoughts in uniforms and legal robes and the clothes she'd worn to lunch. I'd always believed in compartments, my job, her job, our marriage. Suddenly, the walls between them felt like wet tissue. For the first few nights, I did what most men my age do with problems. I shoved them down and pretended they were indigestion. I told myself I was overreacting. She was a lawyer. He was a client. It wasn't like she was passing him police files across the pillow. Still, every time I closed my eyes, I saw them at that booth. The way he smiled at her. The way she didn't look uncomfortable at all. By the fifth night, I gave up on sleep entirely. I went downstairs, made coffee I didn't need, and stood at the kitchen window staring at the dark yard. There's this moment sometimes when your brain gets tired of lying to you. It just stops trying to spin things and lays the truth out like a file on your desk. I heard my own thoughts as clearly as if someone had spoken them. You swore to uphold the law. You didn't swear except when it's awkward at home. I ran a hand over my face, feeling every one of my 50 years. I guard the law, I muttered into the empty kitchen, surprising myself with the sound of it. Even if the law sleeps beside me. It sounded dramatic as hell, like something from a bad movie, but there it was. The sentence landed in my chest and stayed. Something old inside me shifted. That part of you that first made you put on the uniform, back when you still believed the oath meant something literal. If you want to call it an inner lion, fine. It wasn't roaring. It just woke up, stretched, and looked around like, really? This is what we're letting happen? I stared at the dark window a long time. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her with feelings. That never works when lawyers are involved. I was going to do what I'd always done best. Investigate. Before you get the wrong idea, I didn't grab department gear and start wiretapping like some cartoon cop. I knew the line. I'd drawn it enough times for other people. But there are things a man can do within the law, as a private citizen, especially when that man happens to know something about evidence. It started small. I bought a little digital recorder, one of those thumb drive size things that look like junk but pick up everything. I kept it in my pocket for a day or two, getting used to it. Then, one afternoon before she got home, I slid it under the runner on the hallway table where she always dumped her purse and took calls. I'll only do it once, I told myself. Just to calm my mind. Sure. That evening, she came in, kissed my cheek, said she had to make a couple of quick calls. Said it like always. I nodded, my heart hammering like I just chased someone on foot. I waited upstairs like a teenager sneaking in after curfew. An hour later, when she was in the shower, I went down, palmed the recorder like some burned-out spy, and took it to my home office. I sat at my desk, pressed play. Most of it was boring. Voicemails, scheduling, her telling someone she didn't have time for a charity auction. Then a male voice came through, low and familiar. Called her. I froze. She was calm, businesslike. No, you can't move that amount in one go, she was saying. You spread it. 3, 4 accounts. You make it look like consulting fees or community grants. His muffled reply. Yes, I know someone at the permitting office, but I can't make zoning laws vanish, Victor. I'm your lawyer, not a magician. More back and forth. No admissions like we are definitely committing crimes together, mwahaha, but enough to make my gut tighten. A week later, I had hours of recordings. Different clients, but the same few names circling around like vultures, shell companies, foundations, donations, projects. She sounded like a project manager for an evil nonprofit. I didn't stop at the recorder. A retired colleague of mine, Kenny, had gone into private investigations. Real old school guy, still printed out emails. I took him to coffee, danced around it for 10 minutes, then finally laid it out. I need you to check into something for me, I said. Discreetly. On who? He asked. I hesitated. Alice. He stared at me for a long time, then nodded once. Okay, he said. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that name until I file this as Client A. But I'll look. Banking records are funny things. They don't know they're incriminating. They just sit there in neat lines like soldiers waiting to be sent into battle. When Kenny came back with what he'd found, he laid the folder down like it weighed 100 pounds. She's got more accounts than you know about, he said gently. And a lot of money moves in ways that would make any auditor sweat through their suit. He showed me transfers from companies I recognized as fronts from case briefings. Payments labeled as retainers, consultations, community advocacy, moving in right after court victories, zoning approvals, mysterious settlements. There was a pattern. Money in, cases handled. Money out, smoothed paths. If this was anyone else, Kenny said, you'd be calling for a task force. I closed the folder and just sat there, staring at the wood grain of my desk. He hesitated, then added, there's one more thing. I picked up something from a call she made. You might want to hear it. He played a short clip off his phone. It was her voice, crisp and confident. He won't do anything, she was saying to someone. Tom is honorable. He still believes in all that oath stuff. He won't raise a hand against me. Not really. Not raise a hand against you. I repeated it later, alone in my car, turning the phrase over like a rotten fruit. She wasn't wrong about me being honorable. She was wrong about what that meant. There's a moment, when you're chief, where you have to decide if the rules apply to everyone, or if you're willing to carve out little exceptions like everyone except my friends, everyone except my family, everyone except the people I care about. You tell young officers the answer is obvious, the law applies to everyone. It's a lot less neat when everyone includes the person you share holidays and a mortgage with. I wrestled with that for longer than I like to admit. There was a version of this story where I confronted her with the recordings. We had a terrible fight, she cried, promised to stop, maybe move to another practice. Things got fixed, or at least shoved under a rug big enough for both of us to trip over. In that version, I kept my home intact and hollowed out everything else I ever claimed to stand for. I didn't choose that version. Instead, I made an appointment with the district attorney, Rob Curtis, a guy I'd worked with for years. Rob had the kind of perpetually tired eyes that come from reading too many case files and raising teenagers. He sat behind his desk, tie loosened, when I closed the door and put the folder down. "What's this?" he asked. "Evidence," I said. "Potential conspiracy, money laundering, aiding and abetting." "On who?" Every time someone asked me that, it felt like a punch. "Alice." His eyebrows went up. "You're Alice?" "My wife," I confirmed. "Civil attorney. Currently very popular with some very bad people." He didn't open the folder right away. He looked at me instead. "You understand what you're doing?" he asked quietly. I let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in my ribs for weeks. "I do." "You understand I can't just ignore this as a favor to you, or to her?" "I know." "You want to step out, let an investigator handle this without your involvement?" "Yes," I said. "And no." He frowned slightly. "I want it done right," I said. "You bring in whoever you want. Internal affairs, state investigators, the FBI, Santa Claus, I don't care. I don't want this buried, and I don't want it spun. Treat it like any other case. Actually, treat it worse. Scrutinize everything. But I needed to be the one to bring it to you." There was a long silence. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed louder. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "We'll open an investigation." He opened the folder. For the next hour, he asked questions, took notes, and occasionally just sat back, staring at a page like it personally offended him. When I left his office, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Out in the hallway, officers nodded to me, unaware that I'd just handed over the most personal part of my life as evidence. I drove home on autopilot. The house looked the same porch, same flower pots. Alice had insisted we needed to increase curb appeal. We had dinner and watched television like nothing was wrong. She laughed at something on screen, leaned her head on my shoulder. All I could think was, my God, I just turned you in. Arrests in real life are not like on TV. There's no dramatic monologue, no slow clap from bystanders. Most of the time, they're boring, dense, and happen at the worst possible time for somebody's schedule. They chose to pick her up at her office, mid-morning, while she was between clients. Rob told me in advance, professional courtesy. "You don't have to be there," he said. "I know," I replied. Being chief came with a certain awareness. I knew if I showed up, it'd be noticed. I also knew that if I didn't, part of me would always wonder if I'd chickened out at the finish line. So I parked half a block away, out of direct view, but close enough to see the entrance. I stayed in my car, hands on the steering wheel, gripping it like a lifeline. 2 plainclothes detectives went in. A few minutes later, They came back out with her between them. No cuffs, she wasn't a flight risk, and they didn't want a scene. They were professional, respectful. She was composed, in that way you only get after years of losing and winning high-stakes cases in public. For half a second, I thought she might not see me. But her eyes scanned the street, and of course they found my car. She's always had that radar for me. We locked eyes. Her face didn't crumble. It hardened. In that look, there were 1,000 unspoken things. How could you? How dare you? Of course you did. I misjudged you. I knew you'd choose them. You betrayed me. I betrayed you first. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. There's no script for that scene, no version that doesn't sound stupid. They put her in the back of an unmarked car and drove away. I sat there, alone, on a quiet street under a blue sky, thinking that for all my years of training, nothing had prepared me for being both the man in charge of the law and the man married to the accused. The next months were a blur of headlines, hearings, and carefully worded statements. I stayed out of the investigative chain completely, recused, hands off. State investigators took point, Rob's office handled the prosecution. Turned out, the recordings and bank trails were just the beginning. They found emails, encrypted messages, side accounts tied to community projects that were basically just fancy funnels. She wasn't the mastermind, that was Calder and his crew, but she'd been a willing, essential cog. The phrase participation in a criminal conspiracy started showing up next to Alice M. Redding, Esquire. In documents. I saw it once in a news article and had to sit down on a bench outside the station. In public, I was stoic. It helped that I'd been the one to bring it forward. Rumors flew, as they always do, but most people understood. If anything, I'd gone further than most would have. In private, I got real familiar with the inside of a therapist's office. I don't mind saying that. 30 years ago, a cop admitting to seeing a therapist would have been a career death sentence. These days, it just means you're smart enough not to drink yourself into an early grave. At some point in all this, I realized something else. I couldn't keep doing the job the same way after this. Not because of shame, exactly. I hadn't broken my oath. If anything, I had followed it too literally for my own comfort. But every decision, every press conference, every disciplinary action I handed down as chief would now come with a ghost standing beside me, my wife in handcuffs. When you're in charge, perception is part of your job. You can't have the town murmuring, is he going easy on that guy because he feels guilty? Is he going harder because he doesn't want to look soft? So I made another decision. This one hurt less, maybe I was used to the ache by then. I called a meeting with the mayor and the city manager. Sat in a too-big leather chair and told them I intended to resign as chief. They tried to talk me out of it, at first. You didn't do anything wrong, Tom, the mayor said. You did the right thing. I know, I replied. And now I'm going to do the next right thing. We negotiated the terms. It wasn't a forced exit. It wasn't effective immediately under a cloud. It was planned, announced properly, framed, accurately, as a chief choosing to step down after a let's call it a dramatic chapter. On my last day, the department held a small ceremony. There were speeches about integrity and sacrifice. Some officer I'd chewed out 5 years prior called me a mentor, which made me smile in spite of everything. Someone brought a cake shaped like a badge. The frosting was too sweet, but I ate a slice anyway. Standing there, looking at my officers, all ages, all types, some I'd hired personally, some who'd been there longer than me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. I handed over my badge. The metal was warm from my hand. An object I'd carried for 3 decades, suddenly just an object. I walked out of the station for the last time as Chief Redding. Just Tom again. Retirement and I lasted about as long as a donut in the break room. For 3 weeks, I'd tried to do the things retired people do. I fixed a leaky faucet. I went fishing and realized I don't actually like sitting still that long. I reorganized the garage and found 3 boxes of stuff I'd moved from house to house for 15 years without opening once. Then the phone rang. Tom? It's Daniels from the Academy. The Brookhaven Regional Police Academy was where we sent all our recruits. I'd given guest lectures there a few times, war stories, as they called them. "We heard you stepped down," he said. "I'm sorry for everything. But I wanted to ask, have you ever thought about teaching?" "Teaching what?" I asked, even though I already had a hunch. "Ethics," he said. "Honor. Professional responsibility. Whatever you want to call the thing that made you do what you did." I laughed, a sound that came out half rusty, half real. "You want me to stand in front of a bunch of 22-year-olds and tell them, 'Here's how to turn in your spouse'?" He chuckled. "Not exactly. But look, Tom, you've lived this job top to bottom. You've made tough calls. You've seen the cost. We can have some professor with a PhD in ethics read them a textbook, or we can have you walk in and say, 'I lost my marriage because I chose my oath.' Which do you think they'll remember?" I thought about it. About all the rookies I'd sworn in over the years. The way they stood stiff in their dress uniforms, eyes bright, not yet dulled by paperwork and budget cuts and the thousand little compromises that try to creep in. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Yeah, I think I can do that." The course was called Honor and Duty. I didn't pick the name, but I couldn't argue with it. First day, I walked into the classroom wearing a button-down shirt and slacks, no uniform. A couple of recruits nudged each other. "That's Redding, right? The chief?" I wrote my name on the board anyway, Tom Redding. "I'm not here as your chief," I told them. "I'm here as the guy who made a really hard decision and still manages to sleep at night. Most nights." They laughed, a little unsure. We talked about the usual stuff, policies, conflicts of interest, how not to become a headline. But I also told them my story, as plainly as I could. I told them about loving my wife. About trusting her. About the names that started appearing, the lunch at Luigi's, the late nights, the recordings, the bank trails. About that sentence in my kitchen, "I guard the law, even if the law sleeps beside me." I didn't dramatize it. Didn't cry. Didn't make her a cartoon villain, either. She'd made her choices. I've made mine. At the end of the lecture, one young recruit with a buzz cut and far too much energy raised his hand. "Sir," he said, "if you had to do it over again, would you still turn her in?" The room got very quiet. I thought about the empty side of the bed. About the way she'd looked at me that day outside her office. About the years we'd had before all this, the good ones that were just gone now, at least in the form they'd taken. "Yes," I said, finally. "I would. And I'll tell you why." I leaned on the desk, looking at each of them in turn. "Because when you put this badge on," I said, "you're making a promise to people who don't know you, who will never invite you to Thanksgiving, who will never love you back. You're telling them, you can trust me. Not just when it's easy, not just when it impresses your boss. When it costs you. When you really, really don't want to." I held up my hand, the one that used to pin my badge to my chest. "This," I said, "doesn't mean you stop being a husband, or a father, or a friend. But it does mean that if those identities ever demand you break this one," I tapped an imaginary badge spot, "you know which one has to give." No one spoke. A couple of them looked like they were rethinking their career choices right then and there. "Honor and duty," I said. People like to say those words in speeches. On plaques. At banquets. They sound nice. But in real life, honor and duty sometimes look like doing the thing that makes you go home to an empty house. I let them sit with that for a moment. Then I smiled, just a little. "The good news is," I added, "you don't usually have to turn in your spouse. Most of your ethical dilemmas will be a lot more boring. Writing your own reports. Not lying for your partner. Not taking dumb shortcuts. But if you can handle those little choices right, the big ones, if they ever come, won't crush you completely." After class, some of them came up to shake my hand. One young woman, eyes shiny, said, "I'm sorry about your wife." "Me too," I said. "But I'm not sorry about what I did." On the drive home, windows down, sun low over Brookhaven, I caught myself humming along to some terrible pop song on the radio. Life hadn't turned out the way I'd pictured it. There was no golden retirement, no 50-year marriage, no neat little full circle moment where everything wrapped up with a bow. What I got instead was this: a quiet house, a stack of lesson plans, and a classroom full of future officers who might think twice before cutting corners because some old guy told them a story. And you know what? Sitting there at a red light, I realized I could actually smile about it. Not in a "wow, that was great" way. More in a "that was an absolute train wreck, but at least we learned something" way. One day, maybe, I'll even tell the story at a barbecue and have everyone groan and say, "Tom, man, that's rough," while they reach for another beer and laugh in that human way we have of putting band-aids on each other with jokes. Because that's what this is now, for me. Not a tragedy. Not some endless dark cloud. Just a bad story I survived. One I can look back on and say, yeah, that happened. I loved someone who chose the wrong side of the law. And when the time came, I did what I swore I'd do. I upheld the law. Even when the law slept beside me. Thank you for listening my story. If you want more raw, real, and gripping stories like this one, subscribe to the AEN Stories channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.